Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another installment of RadialSpark Radio. With us today, you've got your hosts, myself, Michael Rockford, Justin Ludlow, and in the background, Peyton Gherkin doing all the YouTube magic. Today, what's going on, everyone? Everyone's quiet.
Oh, I did. Come on, I do the wave. I do the very stiff wave at the beginning of every one of these.
I'm just not used to not hearing you.
Oh, sorry. Hey guys, it's me. I'm now going to do my own intro for 5 minutes.
Oh boy.
And we kicked it off. All right, perfect. So now that everyone's loosened up. So we talked a lot last week about what Justin saw at TDX, and that led us to talk about specific architectures and some new things that we had been playing with over the past several months, but also Heroku's been enabling with new feature sets they've talked about on the roadmap at TDX, and also have had some cool new ideas of their own, which we've been incorporating. And Justin, from your experience at TDX, like, you came up with some interesting data pipeline architecture concepts. And originally we had talked about looking at that and just, putting together like a quick little like one sheeter, like a couple bullet points just to like have as an addendum. And it really ended up turning into be like an entire article, albeit a little bit of a shorter article, but something that you were really excited about when you and David Blyles got kicked off on it. And I think we wanted to dive deeper specifically. So for those of you in the audience, this is a little bit more technical than, although a lot of these episodes
I get
pretty
to talk
technical.
about a lot of nerd things in this one, guys.
But I'll be here to try to translate some of that to why anyone else should care. But let's dive into the article. Let's talk about this. So again, I know we're going to sound like a broken record. We're talking Heroku plus Mulesoft. If you've read our Better Together series, this is more of a specific example of how these two products that Salesforce have really shine. And so we've got Heroku plus Mulesoft and Experience Cloud utilizing data pipelines
from Experience Cloud.
And again, the theme, before we dive in, the theme you guys are going to hear from us here at RadialSpark again is that when you're looking at Salesforce as a solution set for your business problems, it's not just, do I get Experience Cloud, or do I get Heroku, or do I get MuleSoft? It's why not all? Why not both? Why not everything? So you're gonna get a lot of that, and so this is particularly highlighting how these three tools play together. So Justin, let's talk about the fundamentals.
Yeah. So the basics of this, what we're going to talk about here, I think is something that almost any enterprise customer can relate to, like especially internal IT members. And this is literally just data pipelines. This may be data pipelines between your organization and partner customer organizations. This may be data pipelines as part of like shifting data for internal IT reasons. Like, these things come up everywhere. You have to build them. I have yet to see a company that is not like, oh, we're piping all of our data into a data lake. We're building a warehouse. We're transferring data from us to our external partners. Somewhere along the line, data's moving. It happens. Now, when we're building a data pipeline, in my humble opinion, or maybe not so humble opinion for those of you that know me well, I think there's three key concerns that we're going to be thinking about here as like the fundamentals of a data pipeline. One of them is the ability to stage that data in the data pipeline. And what I really mean by that is storage. So most people think of a pipeline as throughput, sending something from A to B. But when we're talking from an IT perspective, technology, we have to remember that A and B are usually systems that are already doing a job. And so when you add integration workloads, potentially large integration workloads, which is what you would typically see through a data pipeline, on top of the day-to-day responsibilities for a system, those systems can start to buckle. How do we solve for that? Well, by decoupling the integration from the functional responsibilities of the source and the destination. And that usually means taking the data out of your source, staging it in your data pipeline, and then letting the destination pull it or receive it as it's ready and available. That way, all things are working in the manner that's optimal for them. So staging data in your pipeline in order to decouple your source and your destination systems and to not have to worry about workload overhead on top of their, day-to-day responsibilities. Second fundamental concern is going to be data transformation. So most often data pipelines are put in place not because you're going like A to B, but because you're going A to B and C and D and E and F. And so you have multiple consumers of maybe data that might be coming from a single source, but at the same time could be coming from multiple sources. How do you manage that? Like, how do you give everybody what they need? And at the end of the day, anybody who's a programmer will be familiar with this concept, but it comes down to an interface contract. We're basically saying, hey, this is what you should expect coming out of our data pipeline. The data is going to look like this. This is going to be what's available. Here's how you interact. So we set a standard that all of the destinations expect to receive from us. Now, we have to understand in setting that standard, we might be compromising between what's best for the destination system and what is the shape of the data that's already in the source system. And so when we combine this with the earlier concern about staging data, we have this idea of, all right, I'm going to take data from my source system and I'm going to transform it into the best shape for this data pipeline, and then I'm going to stage it in that shape. That way, my destinations may still have some transformation to do, but hopefully not too much. And we've set a good contract with them in order to get people to use the data pipeline. Because if people aren't going to adopt it or make use of it, why spend all the money on the IT infrastructure? Last but not least, assuming you've done the first two fundamental concerns correctly, people will want to use it, which means you're going to need to control access to it. Theoretically speaking, if you have a critical data flow in your IT landscape, your landscape will still change over time. Systems will get upgraded, replaced, things will shift. And so as that happens, your data pipeline may continue to exist, but your source systems or your destination systems may change over time. And so you need this idea of like, okay, who should currently have access to my data pipeline and for what reasons? So there's this concept of controlling access. Now, if you nail these three fundamental concerns, you have a very healthy data pipeline architecture, and you can move forward almost with the concept of like data pipeline as a service. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. So really quick, now that we've talked about the fundamentals here of what is a data pipeline, what are the main concerns to build a robust data pipeline, but I'm a business user, right? Like, so I'm going in and I'm like, you know what? I've got a Zapier integration. I see an app that I want to hook into my Salesforce.
Can I just
I'm just going to let it run.
Zapier is not a data pipeline.
Yeah. My point is that at what point as an institution, as an organization, are you looking at elevating your integrations into something like this? It's like, why can't I just, do direct API from system A to system B? Why do I need to stage the data? Why do I care about all this stuff? Like, why can't I just shove it in there?
I mean, at the end,
when do I start caring about it?
I think it's, well, and it shouldn't surprise anybody to hear me say this, right? But I've said this tagline before when we talk about Mulesoft. You don't buy Mulesoft to build an integration for your IT landscape. You buy it to build every integration for your IT landscape. The power of Mulesoft and the value of Mulesoft increases exponentially the more systems you connect through it. And I think there's a similar design concept that comes to play with these data pipelines. The idea is the more systems you either need to source data from or the more systems that you need to funnel the data to, if there is, I guess to give some few real world examples, because that's a little easier for me to touch on rather than something abstract. Let's say retail industry, you operate a retail franchise. You have locations nationwide, maybe even internationally, and you have your central corporate structure as well. Corporate structure may be responsible for securing all of your brand deals, all your product sourcing, everything like that. Now, as you are procuring new brands, procuring new products, you have to get that product catalog, that pricing information, like all the main fundamental details for your franchise locations to be able to successfully sell and distribute that product, you've got to get that information out to every single location and the teams that manage them. So that's a situation where you might have a single source of data in your corporate systems, and it could actually be multiple IT systems, but corporate knows the contracts they've just signed with, maybe it's a makeup company, maybe it's like a clothing company, who knows, to like stock new inventory for that brand in their locations. They now need to get all of that product and pricing information out to each of their individual locations that have their own IT infrastructure that run their POS systems, all these different things. So this is an example where you might be building a data pipeline that says, okay, I'm taking my product information from corporate and I'm funneling this through this data pipeline to make it available for every location to then be able to receive that data and act on it and like, you know, update floor layouts, get the pricing registered, update it in the POS. It's all coming through there. Access control is important because as locations are added or removed from your retail franchise, like those endpoints should gain and lose access to the pipeline to be able to fulfill this need. Data transformation is important because, again, high level enterprise corporate negotiations and dealings, like data might come in a certain format that's useless to the individual stores, and we're transforming this in the pipeline to make it more accessible and make it relevant for what the actual individual stores care about in their sales. Another really common example of this would be in the automotive industry. Like, think about like automotive manufacturers needing to push information out about new models or things like that to their dealers. Like, that's a data pipeline for each to get to all their dealerships, which I actually think that might be a great example of this, because dealerships are often, more often than retail, franchised, independently owned, like a lot of different companies, but they're still beholden to your central corporate structure in terms of what are the models we're selling, what do we have, what are the options for these models, things like that. So I guess with those real world examples, in my mind, that data pipeline becomes important when you have that like conflux of data that you need to get out to a lot of people, but you need to control who you're getting it out to.
So it really comes down to, I mean, I think the example you gave there is really good for when you have a centralized, like top-down structure system feeding out, like that's the hub, feeding out to all the spokes, like all these little systems, and then also having to get data back. And that data, the ability for your firm, the central organization, to homogenize that data across all the feeds isn't necessarily total. And so what I mean by that is, in your franchise model, you might be getting data from one region that is in one format, even though they're doing the same thing, because they're using, and let's say the dealership example, they're using, instead of Dealer Socket, they're using whatever the other CRM that they have. And so it's slightly different format. It's the same, like, again, it's like takes the same models and whatnot.
Data, but different physical structure.
Yeah, and you can't enforce it because in California they have some sort of blah 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 agreement and it has to be like this, but in Ireland it's like that, as an example, like extreme example, like some weird regulation, you have to deal with it and it kind of flies through. So you see some of that, but I think from a more simpler use case, what you're talking about, conceptually speaking, from an abstract standpoint, is that when you have, it's not just that you have a large number of systems you need to integrate, you have a lot of interdependencies between systems. And so your number one principle where you're like, hey, like it's not just an open pipe where data just flows and wherever it goes, it's just like A to B, like it's a straight pipe, like it's at however much velocity it goes, we have no control over it, just all the data just flows through one end. It's not like a waterfall of data that falls into just a big pond. You're saying, listen, we're going to actually build this pipeline and we're going to have little valves, so to speak, where we're like, oh, hang on, these downstream systems aren't going to be able to consume data that quickly, so we're going to slow it down, or we're going to pool it over into this other container so that we can filter it before we put it back into the main pipe.
Or
example.
So you touched on a really great concept there, this idea of like valves on the pipe, because when we talk about staging data in the pipe, that means that we can hold the data there. So something that comes up is, and I think like the product example is a really good use case for this. When you're negotiating new product deals, or when like there are updated products that you need your locations to carry or distribute, there is a very key interdependency between like your core corporate systems and like your retail locations, to like make sure that they, one, don't sell something that you don't carry anymore, because that's a problem, or two, sell something before it's available. So there is this idea of valves and like basically setting up a place where your locations can go, and like on an interval that they need to check, they can say, hey, what's currently still valid? Let me pull from the pipe and see. And then from the source side of the equation, like the corporate side of the equation, like a lot of these business dealings to get new products placed and have this ready to go, they're probably happening maybe well in advance of the initial retail date. So the source has the ability to drop that data into the pipeline and be like, hey, don't expose this yet. It's not ready to be shared. This is the date when I want to open the valve and include it in. So there is a very serious concept of like interdependency on, I have a lot of data that I need to share with a lot of people, but I need to do it intentionally to drive effectively a cross-entity business process.
Right. And I think the illustration I'm trying to draw, like again, using the like you've got, when you break down these three different principles, the fundamentals,
yes,
you've got the valves on the pipe to control the flow, like how much, how quickly is it going through, from which sources is it coming through at what time. So it's like you've got multiple pipes feeding into one main pipe, as an example. You might turn one off or slow it down or speed it up or whatever. But you could also divert the flow into what you mentioned here is storage. Like you could put it into a storage tank, and that storage tank allows you to do transformations on that data as necessary. Or like, hey, I'm staging it here, it's not for you yet because I'm putting it into a tank that will only release every Monday because that's when the new stock's available in your example. As like you can put all these rules on that storage tank for when it feeds back into the main data pipeline, as you're saying. You could also bolt on other data enrichment tools like AI or AI enrichment or other ancillary sources that have been fed into this that you can feed on top of it. So
there's a silver spoon in the specific architecture that I put together here. Definitely that idea of being able to run a data pipeline almost as like a service if you wanted to treat your other IT systems as customers. So I was going to say, just to finish the
analogy. And so then the third example is just like you said, which pipes can be accessed. So it's kind of like the first one where you're like, hey, I've got the valves, I can turn it off. Like you want to be able to turn any particular valve off. Like this data is now shut down. They can't get it. They can't send it, like because we've sold off that store or whatever it is, or that customer or that user is no longer able to access the system, all that stuff. So really, when you're looking at this, like as a business, when I'm like, hey, I want to grow up from just point-to-point integrations into Salesforce, as an example, which we see a lot, like in the Salesforce ecosystem, obviously because we're in the Salesforce ecosystem, but you've got app exchange products, you've got point integrations through things like Zapier, or just basic like ETL tools, or one-off API integrations that you've built yourself in Apex, things like that. And you're just shoving all this data in here, and you're building workflow rules on top of Salesforce to then manage and manipulate. And so Salesforce becomes not really a data pipeline, but it becomes all three. Like you're controlling access, you're storing all the data, and everything's funneling into this one tool that really is your CRM, but it's not really purpose built to do all this stuff. It can at certain scales, but at some point, if it's your tier one cannot fail go down system, and you're shoving more and more and more and more into it, that's when you're saying it's like, hey, listen, I'm looking to upgrade because I have all these other systems that are being interdependent. I'm abusing one particular system. I need to have a specific purpose-built solution. And this is what you're talking about here, where Heroku and Mulesoft can pull that together.
Exactly. And like I said, Experience Cloud does fill that role for helping manage the control. And this is tying into some really cool, like Mulesoft tooling that is embeddable in Experience Cloud, but the limitations of scale are built into like Salesforce's multi-tenant design, right? So we're talking about Heroku and MuleSoft here in this data pipeline. MuleSoft's an API tool. If you're using Salesforce as your staging database, inbound API limits. And MuleSoft is going to be making API calls to push data in and to pull data out of the pipeline. So you can already see right there, as your number of interactions, transactions, consumers, publishers increases in this overall pipeline, that API count's going to go through the roof. And if this whole Salesforce org is just to manage a pipeline, you're not going to have a user count or a base limit for your inbound API requests that makes sense for that purpose.
So let's talk about let's talk about the specifics here, because you go through the fundamentals, you kind of explain it in this article a little bit.
I want to run down to the multiple audiences architecture diagram, because I think this is the most clean representation I have of this. Peyton, if you'll make sure we pull that up. So
the most technical.
Yeah. So with this, I want to start at our highest level here, just our biggest boxes that you guys can see in the diagram. And this is MuleSoft, Heroku, Salesforce, top to bottom. Now, I'm going to start with Heroku because we're the Heroku guys. Everybody who's not interested, bear with us. This is what you get with RadialSpark. So Heroku is handling that data staging concern, because this is the one piece that we kind of just talked about with Salesforce. Inbound API limits. If it's your staging database and you're storing your data there, and every single MuleSoft transaction is going to result in API request to Salesforce, at some point you're going to hit that inbound API limit. You're going to rack up when you get to scale. That's going to be a problem. So Heroku's actually the database. It is providing the data persistence to the MuleSoft APIs that give us our data staging. Now, the other thing I want to call out here that's kind of, I think, intuitive, but maybe not immediately apparent to uninitiated viewers. We have MuleSoft at the top, and you can see I've got like some side A, side B experience APIs. I'm going to explain what I mean by those sides in a little bit. But what I want to call out is we have our experience API layer. Underneath that, we have our process API layer. And then when we jump down to Heroku, you will see we still have that system API layer. So this is MuleSoft's cherished 3-layer API architecture. I go off about it all the time. I love it. I think it's great. The system APIs are existing on Heroku because this is where you can use, from, I think it was the last article I put out, Express, Loopback, Nest.js, name your backend programming framework that has support for database connector tools, things like that, to conveniently connect to your staging Postgres database and create a model-based CRUD API that provides the direct data access to the database. I think this is important because like MuleSoft's implementation experience is most luxurious when you get to interact with other APIs. It's a little more tedious when you have to get in and like use infrastructure connectors and be like, I actually have to go in and run a query and get this and do these things. If you can just say, oh, I'm taking this data, I'm transforming it, and then making an API request, these flows become really simple, really elegant. It's wonderful to work with. So we do that ugly infrastructure connection work in the system APIs using the development technologies we all grew up on, that everybody knows and loves, that are cool, convenient, they're there. But this is system level APIs. This is following MuleSoft's design pattern. On top of that, we have these process APIs. And in this example, you guys can see inside of here, I have an account model API and a contact model API. In this hypothetical data pipeline that I've drawn up, this is an account and contact data pipeline. So these model APIs here at the process API level, this is where the transformation in some of that data processing can happen. So as data is coming in from a write API to push data into staging in the data pipeline, it can say, all right, well, in our data pipeline, accounts look like this. So you gave me data from this system that looks like this. I'm going to make some transformations to make it look right. And then I'm going to hit the API to write it into the database. So what this means is, in this case, we are staging the data post-transformation in the format that we intend it to be consumed, by the destination systems. And I think there's an advantage to that because it means, in a lot of cases with a data pipeline, you're going to have more destinations than sources. And so each of those destinations, potentially being controlled by a different entity, wanting to reach out and request that data when it's convenient for them, having it pre-formatted for their convenience. So it's like, hey, come and get it when you're ready for it. You're not going to have to do a lot of post-processing work after you grab it. That is how you're delivering downstream value through your pipeline, is staging your data already clean, cleansed, transformed. So that's what we're doing in our process APIs. Now, I just want to talk about one set of the experience APIs first. And this is your top layer API layer, or top layer of APIs in the 3-layer architecture. So this is what the actual data pipeline sources and destinations interact with directly. I've basically broken it out into a read API and a write API. So if you have read API access, that means that you are able to read staged data from the data pipeline to consume it. So that would be the API that a destination system would be interacting with. The write API is the ability to push data into the pipeline. So that is what source systems would interact with. Now, they both exist side by side because some data pipelines are bi or multi-directional. So you may be pushing some data for which you're a source, but pulling other data for which you are a destination. And so having the read and write APIs, we are able to facilitate specific directional flow of data between a multitude of systems. Now, here's where I kind of wanted to get into like side A or side B experience APIs. If every single one of your data pipeline connected systems is going to have the same level of access. So let's say there are only 2 systems and they're both sources and they're both destinations. And this might be like a data sharing solution at this point, but they both have the same access to everything. That might be a one-sided data pipeline where it's just like, hey, everybody can push whatever they need to in here and pull whatever they need to out of it. On the flip side, it could be something like, I'm going to use the retail example. We may have a data pipeline where it's like, I'm taking new product catalog information and pricing information, and I'm pushing it from corporate to retail locations. But then from the retail locations, I am taking specific order data for these new products, and I'm pushing it back to corporate for large scale, like demand prediction or trend analysis. And so for the product catalog, the corporate systems are the source and the retail locations are the destination. But for the order information, the retail locations are the source and the corporate systems are the destination. So we have a 2-sided pipeline, effectively the corporate audience of the pipeline and then the retail location, and it could be multiple retail location audience of the pipeline. So corporate might be side A, retail locations could be side B. Side A has write API access specifically for pushing product catalog information and read API access specifically to pull order. Whereas side B, the retail locations, have the opposite. They have read API access to the product catalog information and write for the order. This segregation of concerns matters once we get all the way back down to the Salesforce box. And this is where we look at the Anypoint API Community Manager. So this is literally an Experience Cloud native community designed to manage access to your specific APIs. So when a new corporate system is being stood up, whether it's going to be a source or you want to funnel that order data back into that corporate system, an internal IT developer might go into the API Community Manager and say, hey, I'm building this thing. I need access to this data to build this thing. This is me requesting access. And then the owner of this pipeline can say, yep, run it up the chain. Do we have approvals? Is it cool for me to expose this data to them? Sure. And then they turn it on. And in the API Community Manager, like them getting approved is then what issues like their authentication credentials against those APIs that are scoped to whatever's been granted. So by separating like side A, side B, things like this, people are requesting specific access to your data pipeline, to the data they need in your data pipeline to facilitate whatever the business process may be. Now, this is where I started talking about the concept of a data pipeline as a service, because with what we have here, and before I go down this road, I'm going to make a small detour. I haven't touched on it yet, and it's not actually necessary for the fundamental architecture I'm talking about here, but I have included Heroku Connect, and I am like syncing through Heroku Connect data from the staging database, this Heroku Postgres, into account and contact information in Salesforce. Now, the idea here is this. If you wanted to run a data pipeline as a service, basically like treating all ends of your data pipeline as customers, they have to request access from you, they have to get entitlements to do this. What this means is Salesforce becomes your command and control console. You can see all the data that is currently staged in your data pipeline by having it synced in through Heroku Connect or Salesforce Connect if you wanted to do external objects, not worry about storage limitations. And then you're also hosting the community wherein people are coming to request access to that data for specific functions, and you have the ability to approve and do it. So if you wanted to think about like selling data pipeline access, literally data pipeline as a service, you have everything you need to command and control in this, all in this little IT stack that we have.
And this is a common paradigm that we promote here at RadialSpark for these types of apps. Like I particularly call it like Heroku Salesforce hybrid applications. So where Salesforce and their UI becomes that command and control center, which is like a good way to describe it. Like, you get all the tools and toolkits out of the box from Salesforce, from their ORM, for their user management, some basic workflow, validation, automation, other plugins, things like that. You get that all those creature comforts have been built on the Salesforce platform in the last 20 years, straight out of the box. But you leverage the power of AWS and scaling those machines as much as you need to for staging data or API work right on Heroku. And so what you're talking about here is what you're able to do here is, instead of having Salesforce be, I don't want to call it a bottleneck, but in lack of a better term, the bottleneck here with the endpoint for all the data, the control of all the data, who has access and whatnot, you're pushing all of that to Postgres via Heroku Connect into Heroku, so that it truly becomes that as a service model. Because now Salesforce is controlling the access of it, but it's not controlling the flow of data. It's one step removed.
It's not the platter on which the data is served. It's like the person holding the platter, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And so what's really cool about this is like this architecture scales up and down basically infinitely and in so many different ways. So in this diagram, we have a side A and a side B. But there's nothing like, if there's another combination of access, a specific audience group we're dealing with, there's nothing that can't say we release a fleet of side C experience APIs. So as you build this out and as you figure out who needs what from this data pipeline, you can add additional endpoints to the data pipeline just by adding extra experience APIs that consume the standard process APIs that go back to your same pre-existing Heroku staging in order to open up to new either internal or external customer bases for your data pipeline. This can also scale down, which is rather interesting when you think of the concept of like data as a product, which is something that pervades the technology space like everywhere. Like everyone's data, all the data that gets generated, it helps you sell, it helps you market, it helps you understand your internal operational efficiencies or inefficiencies. And so there's a value to that data access. And there are companies that have entire lines of business just about, hey, I will share the data I have with you. So what if we were to get rid of side B, we just have like a side A, and this now becomes like a data sales platform, because you still have your data staging, you have all this data that somebody wants access to. And rather than thinking of it just as going from an A to a B or an A to a B and a C, you're just saying, I'm going to sell my data. And when you buy access to my data from me, what that means is going into the Anypoint API Community Manager, like you sign a contract with me, it gives you these entitlements. I approve your access to these APIs that give you then the ability to request these sets of data, again, in a logical and intelligent way that you could then pull in and incorporate for whatever your purposes are, whether that's remarketing efforts or other things. So this architecture as a data pipeline also basically works as like a data service station when you go back and you think of that like single audience approach, where it's just I have data that has value to people and I can sell access to that data and make it available through APIs that I can very intuitively control. And when you think of a world where maybe you have a line of business that's around data, to be able to have opportunities in inside sales operations, which is almost always needed with these data plays, where you go in and you close the deal and they're getting community access. And as part of closing the deal, their API access and Mulesoft is approved. And then they just access this productized infrastructure for your data that you've already got in place. That's a pretty powerful concept, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you're not outright selling that data, as an example, like even if you're just trying to control different partnerships, different vendors, or other business relationships you have, both inside the organization and inter between other organizations, and in particular, like again, not to sound like a broken record, but looking at AI and its usage and integrating with different LLMs and making different partnerships with the various new AI companies that are constantly popping up and will constantly continue to pop up over the next, decade, frankly, and giving access to that type of training data, and having the ability to turn some of that stuff on and off by region, by locale, and having this infrastructure in place with these access controls is also very useful to help future-proof your organization when it comes to legislation that's coming out with customer data. Things like GDPR out in the European theater.
Yeah, CCP.
So I don't know why I say European theater as if it's like a theater of war, although
all IT is war.
But like in European, over the European Union, CCPA for California. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, but when you're looking at some of that, it's like, hey, I need to be able to turn this off. I need to be able to delete it from these downstream systems. I need to be like having this level of access control logic. It becomes more and more important, and also it's easier to incorporate new companies into your overall IT infrastructure by having all these predefined contracts of how you're integrating with all of your downstream systems, so that when you add a novel set of systems, there's still work to get them incorporated, but it's like, hey, this is the map. Like here's how you're going to talk to it. You look
You've
at the
already built half the bridge.
You're going to be part of, in your example here, you're going to be part of side B. Like you're a side B type of organization. We've purchased you. Here's how you're going to consume the data. I need you to conform to these paradigms. It's already laid out. All my infrastructure is scalable. Like, let's talk about how we're gonna. What's the plan to go through there? And you've already got that built on. So you're just like the highway's there. You're just adding a new exit as an example, and a new entrance ramp. So okay, so I mean, again, this is pretty in-depth technical with some good explanations on your part. One thing I want to ask here too, before we move on to the other diagram, which is a little bit more higher level. You've got update notifications in Kafka and Heroku, and this line from the endpoint community manager. Like, what's this for in particular? Because and if you just want to just really quick, because I know we've talked about it before in the past, and a lot of our audience probably knows what it is. But what's Kafka? Why do we care? Like, that's not like, I know there was like a crazy guy like in history, but like, what are we talking about here?
So Kafka on Heroku is going to be Apache Kafka, and that is a streaming solution. So for any of you who have ever built something where you're like, oh, I'm receiving requests through an API, but it's going to take me a while to process these requests. So I offload the work by taking the information and I save it in Redis with an ID. And then I've got another set of processes that are checking that Redis and they're like pulling each thing down and then saying, oh, hey, it's done. And it posts an update back to the Redis to let me know when it's completed. That kind of like queuing concept, if you will. Kafka's basically that on steroids. It's not designed so much as like a static memory store. Its storage elements are called topics. And the idea is that you are pushing messages into topics in Kafka that then multiple subscribers, so these would be destinations of the Kafka topic, are able to receive those messages again at their own pace when they want. And each system knows which messages from the topic it's already seen or received. So you get this idea that everything's always received in the order that it is sent. Even if certain systems are unavailable or disconnected for a while, what have you, they keep track of where they were, where they left off. So this is often used in what we call like pub sub architecture, where a publisher is publishing messages into topics that then subscribers are receiving and then processing when they're available, when they're ready. So what we're doing here and what we're talking about is effectively change data capture. So as things are being updated in our staging database, we are sending out notifications on Kafka that both side A and side B could subscribe to. So like if somebody's like, I care about product catalog updates. And so there's a topic in Kafka that'll have like product catalog updates in the database. And whenever we have an update come in, it's just saying and sending out a notification to all interested parties like, hey guys, data pipeline has updated product catalog data as of this timestamp. If you want to come in and grab that, here you go. And that's for all the different things you have staged, sending those update notifications out. So this is like how you keep everybody in the know on the updates that are happening in your data pipeline. And it's a good thing you asked that question. It was something I wanted to make sure we touched on before we left this diagram. Now, the lines coming from that Anypoint API Community Manager, that's because like this isn't just some cardboard storefront. Like the API Community Manager actually directly facilitates the access to the other APIs. So like if you have internal developers that are looking to build entirely new endpoints, like a side C, side D set of experience APIs for this pipeline, they would go in to ACM is what they call it for short, and they would request access to the process APIs, get approved so that they would then get process API authentication credentials that they could use in their experience APIs to build side C, side D. End users can go to that same community to request access to each of those experiences. And it is through that ACM that the actual authentication credentials are generated and issued and made valid with the actual APIs. So the ACM is the actual access control center for all of your Mulesoft APIs, which are what your end users of the data pipeline are going to be consuming, that experience level, and what high-level internal developers that might be building experience APIs would consume. So anybody that's looking to either structurally expand the data pipeline or consume it, they'd be going through that ACM. And so the arrows there are just saying like, hey, like this isn't like just a thing off to the side. Getting approved there, getting your credentials issued there, that gets pushed directly to the APIs, and that's what authenticates you and then makes your credentials valid.
Okay. Awesome. So then let's go up a section here where we're talking about the uniform audience.
Yes.
And this is a diagram we've used before in the past when we talked about the better together or best together, I believe it was, with Heroku, Mulesoft, and Data Cloud. So with this inclusion, just walk us through like it looks like from the most part, like this is talking about like as opposed to us working with like vendors and dealers as an example, or franchisees like that, internal corporate to external wider audience. We're talking about, okay, we're one large monolith organization. We have all these different systems. How do we tie it together? Like this is like the other example for this, right?
Well, because this is effectively this is one flavor of like a side A only architecture. And so in this case, side A is internal IT systems in your business. And now we don't have all the layers broken out in this architecture because when we first put this diagram together, this was very much about Mulesoft, Heroku, and Data Cloud together. But I do think it's relevant here in that effectively what's happening is we have our ERP systems, general ledger systems, point of sale systems, all these other things in the internal IT landscape that are then interfacing with what is not shown in this diagram, that set of experience and process APIs in order to take consolidated data, feed that in. Now, what gets cool about something like this is like, what if you wanted to be able to take data from all these systems and then feed it into AI, like centralized AI. And this is where a lot of the cool data cloud and Einstein updates that came out at TDX start to come into play, because all of this stuff is a single-sided uniform audience. You just feed in the data, you stage it in your Postgres, you process that, feed it in the data cloud. You can then, through the new model builder product, which I believe just became GA, you can then launch LLM-based AIs on top of your data cloud that will train on all the data in your data cloud and can provide insights and analysis. And that can trigger what they're calling like data cloud triggered flows, which can issue platform events, at which point the sky is the limit. So you can take all this single audience data, your own internal IT, feed it into data staging on a one-sided data pipeline, feed the data staging in the data cloud, have data cloud trigger AI-based learning, trend analysis, knowledge, push that back out to Heroku, and let's say tip off a Kafka notification to other systems saying like, hey, like we noticed this, and this, like you should adjust pricing on this product because we've seen sales dip down. We're maybe priced above demand because we've been seeing a trend over the past couple of months. And if we lower the pricing a bit, we think we're going to see volume go up. That's AI insight that needs to be acted on in the POS, but that you're deriving in data cloud. And so you're basically feeding all the data into your data staging, then feeding that into your AI enabled data cloud, getting an update back that triggers an interaction on Heroku that can then push back to your POS through a pub sub model or even an outbound API request.
So this is what we were kind of talking about earlier, and it ties into like why Kafka and this data staging is a bit important, because you have data cloud here now adding enrichment, because it's like you've integrated an LLM, it's being trained on your data, and it's elevating platform events such that is then triggering publishing to that Kafka topic, which goes down to the downstream system of relevance. Let's say it's your general ledger system where your CFO is running a report with Tableau as an example, and specific data is getting tagged with other metadata to highlight it and saying, hey, look at this trend. It looks like the pricing for, this widget is not matching current demand. Like we should adjust it, or we should remove it from sale, or we should replace it with something else. It could give some of those suggestions or highlight that data into the downstream system where it is particularly relevant. And then you could go ask for that. You could, like, if you have the community access control manager, you go in there and you're like, hey, I want to see the full insights. What's all the details here? So you could get some of the details down to the relevant system to highlight it. You could go back and get more data. That would be one example. You could push it all down with the full amount of insights if your downstream system allows for that. Yeah. But like pretty much you could drive people back to Experience Cloud and say, hey, oh, wait, this is not what I expected. I'm in my general ledger. Let's say it's SAP, as an example, as part of the SAP ERP solution, and there's general ledger hanging off, or even QuickBooks.
Yeah.
And you're like, this doesn't look right. Let me go go check the community and figure out why was this tagged? Like this looks weird, as an example. And you can start tying in and enriching this data while preserving the, bare metal truth that like everyone's used to now. Exactly. It's like, a dollar's a dollar, this is this, but you're able to add layers on top of that without having to completely rewrite how your downstream systems work, like your general ledger or your ERP or your POS. It's like they exist, you've bought them, they're there. Like, I'm just letting you know that in my community, this stuff has been tagged. Like I've pushed an event over here that you guys should then potentially check out, as an example.
Yeah. And because again, Salesforce has really been leaning in on AI enabled or enhanced functionality, right? But like, that's not the only place you're going to need to act on it. So getting all your data together, having this idea of like a data pipeline or a data service station that's getting this all together, that's leveraging those AI enabled features.
I think a data service station, I really like that example.
I know, right?
It's more than a pipeline at this point, because like I always think of like Heroku Kafka, that's a pipeline. Like it goes from A to B, it's pipe. But you're talking about like an entire refinery at this point, where you're really like and by that I mean like if you look at like an actual honest to God, like oil refinery with all the different pipes and
Yeah.
turning things on, or natural gas. Like you're just
Well, and honestly, I think that's
you're purifying. You're turning a bunch of levers. You're like, it's not just like, hey, here's a pipe and it's a pipe and oil goes.
No, well, AI is going to lead to increased complexity with data pipelines and more intricate implementations, because again, like AI is driving the need for more and more data portability. So our data transportation infrastructure, which is what we're talking about here, is going to get more and more robust and complex until it evolves, you know, into that idea of
and I think the takeaway for me, like at a high level takeaway from a lot of this, because we've talked about some fairly complex topics here. But when you look at a diagram like this, where it says your ERP API, your GL API, your POS, a lot of these systems, not all of them, if you're at a high level enterprise, a lot of these can be customized. Some of them can be expensively customized, takes a little bit to update it. So when we talk about passing down metadata tags to your GL or whatnot to your CFO, it's like that might not be possible. Like it might just have to post the raw data. But this is where you have like Experience Cloud and Heroku are able to come in and add that data enrichment, because you have that data service station. Like it's sitting there on Heroku, and it's being exposed to your downstream users that are able to get access to this data enrichment, whether it's, you know, just through this entire process, or if AI is involved with it, regardless of how it's enriched, just by like pooling in a bunch of different systems, you're able to surface this information to the people that need to see it without having to completely rip out a core instrument in your business. Like, and I think that's a thing that a lot of people struggle with, is that it's like, well, you know, my GL, like it's too, like my GL is tied into so much stuff and we have so many processes built off of this. Like I don't want to rip and replace it with something that can be more customized. That's scary, right? You know,
terrifying.
I don't want to do that. But this is literally able to add an enhancement layer on top of that without disrupting downstream systems. And I think that's really important for a lot of organizations when you're looking at, how do I start incorporating AI? How do I start, leveraging my data more, which is, you know, like how do I deal with all these integrations? Again, like when you're looking at the age of AI, it all starts with data, which is, I think we talked about in a couple episodes ago, like your data quality, your data stewardship, where it is and whatnot, and setting up solutions like these and starting to set up solutions like these where you're able to stage your data, we're able to have a safe place to transform it, and when you're able to have a place where you can control access to what system needs where. And that's, I don't mean control access be like, oh, this person should or shouldn't, like based on like, oh, we're not talking about like hackers and things like that. I'm talking about this data needs to flow from not just system A to system B, but it needs to flow from system A, be processed, then go to system D to then be enriched before it gets over to system B, because I want that enrichment to happen before it gets over here. And that system's purchased over here, and it's just like, listen, I'm just sitting here, I'm waiting for an account. Like that's all I like. That's all I take. It needs to be in this format, and I'm waiting for this, and it needs to look like this. So that's why you have that. Hey, I need to enrich it and then transform it and then send it. You know, and I think that's the whole point we're talking about here, is that in the past, when you would do some of these Salesforce solutions, because Salesforce and the Force.com platform is very malleable, you're able to transform and modify your database fairly readily. We try to get everyone on Salesforce, like we like all their solutions. Like we want, like they use it for their CRM. They use Financial Force. I know they changed the name, but
some companies use it as their GL.
As their GL, right? You know, they have plugins for it. Like it's their source of truth. That's where they go. That's where everything is done. And that can work. That does work. Like we've seen that work. But at certain scales, it might struggle, and you want to offload. You need more processing power. I need to incorporate AI into this. Well, now you're looking at minimum data cloud to get the vectorized database, to get the performance that you need to start training on that data, querying it. And when you start talking about, well, where does Heroku fit in here? Well, we want to have a place to play. We want to have a place to have sample data, test data. Like how do I test these ideas that I have? How do I generate synthetic data in order to to test our hypotheses. Like, oh, okay, like I want to make sure that this whole process that I've just built or I think will work is going to work in the way I expect, or I'm adding new features and functions to my business process and I need a place to test it. Like you don't want to just spool up new sandboxes constantly, which are expensive.
And I
Especially
would
full
even
copy.
I would even say just to have like a day-to-day interactable form of the data that you have in Data Cloud. There's a value there because and I don't know
That's
that
what
we're
I'm saying.
going to touch on it today. It's something I'd like to bring up on our next broadcast. The article about all the Data Cloud stuff that came out with their Spring 24 release. Like in the article itself, they called it out very well, where they're like, hey, we're making it easier to access and interface with Data Cloud data across all the Salesforce products. And they're doing a great job of it, but it does hint at, the fact that especially like early stages Data Cloud, much like, and I'd say this is still true for Salesforce as a whole, but maybe not as pronounced as it used to be. Like Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Salesforce used to be a very greedy, very like, we are the center of your data universe. We want the data in. It's about getting the data to us, not pushing it out to other systems. And there's a business logic to that. That makes sense. But, as Data Cloud was getting launched and released, like it was like, we got to get our data into Data Cloud before we can even do anything with it in Data Cloud. So a lot of the documentation, a lot of the feature set, everything was around data ingestion, data aggregation, data analysis. It was not around, okay, the data's in here, what can we do? And now that's where model builders coming in to drop AI and train data on the data, or train AI on the data in your Data Cloud. Data Cloud triggered flows to actually trigger Salesforce flows from data changes that happen in Data Cloud, because your Data Cloud database is not your Salesforce database. These are not S objects. They don't trigger. There's even things for making Data Cloud related lists off standard Salesforce S objects. And what I want to outline here is they're doing a great job better stitching Data Cloud into all of the, call it daily driver platform stuff of Salesforce and all these other things. But it also points out the fact that like Data Cloud is a data lake, and data lakes are not designed to be used as like day-to-day sources of data for other systems. You put water into the lake, you don't drain it. And so with that in mind, having something like this data service station with Heroku, not maybe holding everything you have in Data Cloud, but some of the most recent stuff that's also getting funneled into it, means that data is still highly interactable and integratable in a way that everybody knows and loves.
And that's what I think where you draw the line is like, you want that actionable data, that surfaceable data, whether it's for your customers, partners, your CRM, your day-to-day interactions. Like that's where you have that data agility layer that Heroku provides. So just, a term we've coined, repeatedly, or used repeatedly, and we coined. And again, it's like this is the point of this. It's that it allows you to be more agile with your data. It allows you to like not completely upturn the apple cart and be like, all right, like, because in the example here, like, because Data Cloud is a data lake and it's becoming more and more of a fully featured data lake that you would expect out of like Snowflake. But we still have Snowflake here, and a lot of customers use Snowflake because AWS's data lake is a very good data lake. Sorry Salesforce, but they've got a good product. But that doesn't mean there isn't a place for Data Cloud. That doesn't mean that because they have Snowflake, like Data Cloud doesn't have a role, or Data Cloud couldn't eventually come in and be like, hey, maybe we need to remove that. But that's not necessarily day one, because this diagram you've drawn here, this is, like you said, to harken back to the earlier part of the conversation, this is your side A architecture. There's an entire side B architecture that might be feeding that data lake a whole bunch of, and we don't have any control of that. You're like, we can't disrupt any of that process because of reasons X, Y in 23, whatever, like a whole bunch of objections where we can't disrupt that. So it's like, here's how we're going to plug this in. Here's how we're going to use all these tools. Here's how we're going to start enriching our data on this side of the organization with this, with AI, using Data Cloud, using the customizable training models. This is how we're going to start. And we're going to leverage Mulesoft to orchestrate all the APIs with systems that cannot be disrupted, key tier 1 systems that need to stay in place and are not replaceable. And we're going to use Heroku as the data agility layer to expose data, to allow it to be manipulated freely, to allow test data to be generated synthetically, and to experiment with AI and different solutions, and we're going to have that all be enriched with Data Cloud, Einstein, and other solutions, and pipe that through the rest of our ecosystem, leveraging things like Kafka and Mulesoft. And I think that again just shows why these tools really go together, and why it's important when you're looking at whether you're an organization evaluating, hey, do I need to look at Data Cloud? I already have Snowflake. Or if you're a Salesforce AE that's like, hey, this customer already has, a data lake, and they got some, like, where do I fit in? Or they can't get rid of their ERP. Like, we can't move that. Like, this is like, these aren't objections that should stop you from pursuing data enrichment with AI, pursuing data agility. Like, just because you have downstream systems that are inflexible, adding these layers on top gives you the flexibility you need to leverage all of this stuff.
Well, and I think there's something cool about this architecture that I think pretty closely ties into the TDX session we talked about on our last broadcast, about Data Cloud and Heroku, and the AI from Model Builder and Data Cloud, like triggering an insight about, oh, we have a recall on a product. This person added this product to their shopping cart. We're going to notify them up front and recommend a substitution to prevent a bad brand experience.
Right.
So when we talk about like this data service station and this general architecture, the ability to have that AI interaction, like taking data from the service station, feeding it into Data Cloud, having an AI interact on it, push something back to the service station hub in Heroku, and have like a Kafka notification come out, or an API request to a system for literally any reason, any insight, any purpose, it's possible. Now, most boring, most vanilla in the case of a data pipeline might be, you have a source system. Let's go back to like automotive or retail, where we're talking about product catalog stuff that we're pushing out to all of our sales locations. It could be that as it's running through the data pipeline, that's getting fed into Data Cloud. You have an AI that's looking at it and it says, hold on a second, this data is not logically complete. Like, if these systems start implementing it, like, you're missing some required add-ons or options or features. Like, you can't have a car without wheels. Like, I don't know why you entered incomplete data in your source system. This is going to be a problem. So the AI can like act as a data steward in the data pipeline and say, oh, I found an issue. I'm going to push this back, and I'm going to notify the guys like, hey, you made this mess. Clean this up before we send it out.
And even stuff, and I think that's a good example, like an extreme example, because normally, like, most systems will have some sort of data validation to prevent that data from surfacing. And that's like, oh, if there's a major screw up, like, hey, there's no wheels in the car, like,
but
you can't sell this.
Building the data validation systems, like.
But what I'm saying is they're often more subtle things like that AI can pick up on. Different promotions that aren't being pushed, or things like that, or packages that like should be included, or were recommended to be included based on historical data. It's like, hey, this package did really well, like, you're pushing this up through here, and yeah, it's logically complete, but it doesn't have this piece. Maybe it should, right? Because in March, like, this product sells really well when you did this package and things like that, and you had higher profitability. Like, there's those types of insights where those oversights, like that type of oversight, can be caught or adjusted by adding AI without like having something egregious, like, you got no wheels for the car. But also that too, it's not like you can't do both. I'm just saying, like, I don't want to make it seem like it's only good at catching super obvious stuff. But
yeah,
we're out of time here today. So we're actually going to be back next week.
Yes.
With another article talking more about how Heroku and Experience Cloud plays well together. We've already talked a little bit about this in a very complex scenario of where Experience Cloud kind of ties in with Mulesoft, Heroku, and all this other stuff. This is a very hyper technical scenario that I hope most of you guys are able to follow us through. And if you haven't, please, add comments, shoot us a question, email Peyton. He loves getting those because he just looks at me cross-eyed and go like, Mike, like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is some CTO. Like, I don't know. So then,
then he'll hand it to me and then I'll answer it.
Sorry, Peyton, just throwing him under the bus, driving back and forth over it. But No, to be honest, like guys, like I hope you enjoy this, found it informative. Like this is some really cool stuff that can be done. And like again, it's just tip of the iceberg. There's so much here on this topic that we can go into. We've already spent an hour on it. Next week we're going to talk about simpler architectures, some like when and where Heroku and Experience Cloud play well together.
Experience Cloud.
Yeah. So it's going to be a less technical episode. And then we'll have some other news articles and things to go over, and probably some other things about TDX that we still haven't been able to cover because a lot happened.
A lot did
this TDX. So if you guys get a chance for next year, definitely show up because it's a great conference and you get to really see a lot of cool new things coming out. I know most people are aware of Dreamforce, and Dreamforce does have a huge development room and whatnot, and you get to see some stuff. But I always feel like Dreamforce is, for those of you who don't want to be sold to, TDX is like the conference to go to, in my opinion, because if you go to Dreamforce, they do a great job, like, and there's definitely some useful information out there. But aside from being one big party, you just feel like, oh, well, I just buy this product and everything's done, and you're there. Where TDX is like, okay, now that you bought this stuff, here's how we put this stuff together. Yeah. So TDX, if you don't want to feel sold to, and you want to see how stuff works under the hood and talk to some of the smartest people in the world, they're going to be at TDX. It might also be at Dreamforce, and I'm not saying don't go, but definitely if you have Dreamforce on your dance card, add TDX as well. So guys, thanks so much for your time today. We'll be back next week, same time. And any parting words of wisdom, Justin?
Follow, like, and subscribe. Thank you guys for letting me go over this. Again, as Mike said, if you guys have questions about this data pipeline architecture, data service station, really, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're really excited about this. Quite frankly, for those of you watching, Heroku's also really excited about this kind of thing. So we're probably going to be coming back, elaborating, fleshing out this even further. So please reach out. It's very, very cool stuff. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening to me ramble on just a little bit about some of my favorite technology.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.